All right, welcome back. We're going to talk about conditionals. For those of you who have done any C-derived languages like C, C Sharp, C++, and so on, this is all going to be similar, right? So let's go ahead and create our own class. So we'll call this class conditionals. And then in that class, in that bracket, I'm going to make our main function. So public static void main. In the main, we pass in a collection of strings that we name args for arguments. All right, so we got our main up and running. We're ready to go. The basics are, and I'm just going to kind of walk through the slides a little bit. You have all those basic operators from C, right? So basically, are they equal or not? Are they bigger or smaller than? And every permutation of that, right? So you have equals to is the equals equals. Probably the most common mistake is somebody goes, if A equals B, instead of the 2 equal sign, so 1 equal sign, set something equal. So this would run that command. It would set the value of B into the memory location of A. So now A would have the same, value as B. But what we wanted is 2 equal sign, which really, if you think about it, it's saying, is it equal to? So it's the question, right? The is equal to. All right. So anyways, we got the is equal to. We have the not equal to. We have is it bigger than, or equal to, less than, and then less than or equal to. All right. And then I put a couple of simple examples in here. Then also you have the and the or to join two things together. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just practice some of those right now with some basic if statements. An if and else structure looks like this. If, and then there has to be parentheses here. You put a boolean condition there, so that's a true or false. Then it's going to go ahead and run one command. Now, I have 2 commands here, so I want to bring up a couple notes before I start typing out some examples. The first and really important note is that actually, that's the second one. So the next note is actually that it only usually runs one command. So if I don't have brackets, and it's common as, experienced programmer, just say if A equals B, indent it under it, then system.out.println A is equal to B. And then you can go else. You don't need a condition. That's a pretty common mistake, is the else has a condition. The else is made to just scoop everything else up. So there cannot be a condition there. That would cause an error. And then you can say system.out.println A is not equal to B. Okay, and this is totally valid, but often we want to run more than one command under an if statement. So if you just do this, system.out.println, a second line. What really actually happens here, whoops, I forgot to end my quote. What actually happens here is it goes, if this is true, run this one command, okay? Now, the if statement's done. It did its one statement that it was attached to. And then your program will run this by itself. It'll say, regardless of whether the if or else was true, I'm going to run this. And then it'll get to an else and it'll say, whoa. An else can't come after a print. That's not the way an else is made. An else has to immediately follow an if. So you would get an error when you tried to compile this. If we want to run 2 lines, the white space, the indentation doesn't mean anything here. That's not the way Java's created, right? Python heavily relies on white space and indentation. In Java, that's just for the human to be able to look at the code and understand it. So it's very good practice, but it doesn't affect the programming. Instead, we start a bracket. It doesn't matter whether you start it right here or whether you start it on the next line. It depends on the programmer, which one you do. I usually like to put the bracket up here just because it saves on lines of code and it doesn't get so spread out. But often as a beginner, this can be much more clear, right? The if starting, there's a bracket right here, there's a red dotted line that goes right down to there. So now the if statement saying if A is equal to B, run my one command, and that one command is a bracket. And you could have 100 lines of code in there, right? And then when that bracket ends, I can immediately have an else follow that. Again, I am always going to have a set of brackets, even if I use a single command. I just think for beginners to look at my code, I think that's helpful. Okay, another really important note is there can only be one set of parentheses here. Now, if I wanted to say and B is equal to C, if I want to do that, that's totally okay. However, I need to enclose the entire question, the entire true, false, Boolean question inside a single set of parentheses, right? Now, no error, right? I mean, there would actually be an error because I never declared an A, a B, and a C. But this is a totally valid if statement, right? The one thing to keep in mind here is, I mean, if you have it like this, it does say, okay, so if A is equal to B, condition done, then the one command I should run is and, like that. You can't start an instruction with and so you would get an error saying I was expecting a command here, and is not a valid command. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put that back there. Okay, and then you got one more important note that I want to bring up, and that's just that scope really matters. Okay, and we're going to practice that a little bit. Let's actually write our first program here. So let's say int A equals 1, and then on the next line, int B equals, let's say 2. Okay, now notice I could have done that all in the same line because they're both integers. I could have just had a comma there, and the white space doesn't matter. So I could have done int A equals 1 and B equals 2 on the same line. And then I'm going to say if A equals B, then run this, which says A is equal to B, else print A is not equal to B. So I'm going to Control S to save it. Look, it's red. It's still a new one up here. I need to exactly give it the name Conditionals with capital letters matching. Save it as a Java file on my desktop. Okay, so I'm going to open CMD in that folder. I'm going to Java C conditionals.java. Okay, and now I'm going to Java conditionals. And there we go. A is not equal to B. Let's change it to 1 so they are equal. Let's save it. Let's go back over here and up to recompile, up down to run it, and now A is equal to B. All right, the final important note I want to bring up with you guys is just scope. In Python, when we went over Python, there was really no scope other than when you create a variable inside a function, it only exists inside that function. Anything else, though, you really create in that main file, it just anywhere, you can refer to it anywhere, right? That is absolutely not true in C-derived languages like Java. If I go ahead and inside here create an integer C with a value of 3, and I go system.out.println, the value of C is, and I print that, and then I just do that exact same line right below. So I created this value C equals 3, and then outside this if down at the bottom, I go down here and let's just make sure. So 1 equals 1, so this is going to happen. So it'll say A is equal to B, and then it should print the value of C, and then down here it should print the value of C again. So I'm going to go ahead and Control S to save that. So I have blue up here. I already have my command window open. Whoops, this one. So, oh, that's the old one. Now I'm going to go up to recompile. And look at this. It's saying cannot find symbol C on line 16. So I go down to line 16. So it found C just fine on line 9, but it couldn't find on 16. That's because you created C inside of the if statement. So it only exists from where it's created to the end of this if statement. Now, as a general rule, it is not exactly true, but you could think of it as inside any brackets, anything you create only exists until the end of that brackets, okay? So that goes for if statements, else statements, loops, functions, things like that. So anytime you're naturally indenting over, saying I'm starting a conditional or a loop or a class or a method, and you create a variable, it only exists inside there. So if you say wanted to refer to it in here, you could absolutely create it out here, and then you could change the value to 4 here, and you could change the value to 5 here. What you can't do, though, is recreate a variable with the same name, right? So we can get rid of that. So if we create it out here, we can refer to it inside, right? In substructure, we can refer to it inside the if because it was created in the scope of this entire main method. Now I couldn't refer to C outside, right? Because I only made it inside my main, right? I could create variables out here, and we absolutely will later on, but I just wanted to show you that. So scope is something to really pay attention to when you start using conditionals, because anything that you create inside of an if statement ends as soon as the if statement's done, okay? So if you just want to modify it, like for example, if I wanted to up here say boolean A equal B, right? And then at the beginning, I could set that to false, or I could give it no value at all. And inside here, I could say, oh, okay, so A is equal to B, so I'm going to say A equal B is true. And then down on the next one, I would say, oh, it's not equal, so I could set it equal to false. So I could absolutely create something outside the if else, and inside the if else update it, but I could not create this boolean in here and then outside refer to it and say the end result is. Okay, so I hope that helps with conditionals. Oh wait, I want to actually go over one last thing with you guys. So what if you wanted more than two things, right? What if you wanted an if and then you wanted actually like three cases? So like an if A is greater than B, else if like what if A is less than B, but there's a third case, right? A is equal to B. So an easy way to do this is under your else, right? You could say, okay, what if A is equal to B? Okay, right off, boom, A is equal to B, done. But there's two cases other than that, right? A is less than or A is greater than, which are totally separate. But both of those happen inside this A is not equal to B else. So all we do is say, the one thing I want my else to do, right? Because always your else will run one command, just like your if will run one command. So the one thing you want it to run is else if, and so you put an entire if-else statement here under the else. So you say else if A is less than B, then, and I'll just copy this line to save time, I'll say A is less than B, and then I'll say, okay, else, and so now what we've done is just like in Python where they shortened this, and all they really did was literally just delete these three characters and make it an elif. Instead, logically, you're just saying else if, that's true. So if they're not equal, and if A is not less than, well then, A must be greater than, and that's the last case. So I'll put this one right here. A is greater than B. And let's just check it out. Let's see if A is 1 and B is 2. Let's save it. Oh, I've already got it open here. Let's up to compile. Let's up down to run it. It says A is less than B. That is true. Let's make this 5 now and save it. And we'll go up to recompile. And now A is greater than B. And then let's check it with 2. Let's save it, compile it, and run it. And now A is equal to B. So that's a way to have more than two possibilities. Absolutely, you can also use switch statements. I'm not going to go into that today. I just want to go over the basics of conditionals. All right, guys.